Battlefield games have never been known for their single player campaigns. That's just the truth. That's not to say that it hasn't had some memorable ones over the years, because it has, and I've got no doubt that there are thousands of players who really enjoy the single player aspect of Battlefield. With that in mind, I wanted to look through the single player campaigns of years gone by and remember the good and the bad and maybe what DICE could do better. I'm not going to list these in any particular order, but it's worth mentioning that Battlefield's first foray into a proper single player campaign was when it released the console version of Battlefield 2 Modern Combat way back in 2005. Before that, BF 1942 and the slightly later released Battlefield 2 didn't have single player campaigns. You could play in single player, but when it came to those games that just meant playing on multiplayer maps with bots, not exactly an exhilarating story with exceptional characters or writing. Now, I'm not going to start with Bad Company 2 because, let's face it, I reckon a lot of people will think of that one when you're first deciding which campaign you prefer. Let's instead start with BF3. We all remember the Fault Line gameplay that showed us some single player, and it was really impressive, but did the campaign live up to that hype? The story of BF3 was set in the fictional war of 2014. It takes you to New York, Paris and the Iran-Iraq border. The core story is told in cutscenes through the narrative of an interrogation of the Staff Sergeant Blackburn, who you play as in most of the game. And he's a member of the US Marine Corps 1st Battalion. You do play as other characters along the way, but Blackburn is the main protagonist of the story. The BF3 campaign had some cool moments in it. You start by jumping onto a moving train before trying to move your way through the carriages that are filled with bad guys. Of course, you need to climb out of some of the windows and move along the top of the train for dramatic effect. There is then of course one of the most epic parts of the story when you're on an aircraft carrier getting ready to take off in a fighter jet. That whole mission feels particularly epic. The long walk through the carrier before hitting topside and everything down to the preparations and the takeoff were really amazing and immersive. Being able to be in a jet as well in a single player game, even though you weren't controlling it in this mission, was pretty damn epic. Visually very impressive too, it just felt very immersive. When the Battlefield music kicked in for the first time when you were in the air, I got goosebumps. There was of course the tank mission as well, which was showcased in the trailers a few times with the starting dinosaur, and it did feel pretty large scale when you were playing it. And let's not forget the massive earthquake pretty early on in the game, that too. Would be pretty difficult to leave that one out, wouldn't it, as that was just something else. The campaign was not short of those epic moments, and yes, there are scripted things in here too, but they made the story feel a bit more impactful. That being said, the story itself was probably not the strong suit of the campaign. The visuals are amazing, but the story doesn't really grip you all that much. And there are a lot of quick time events and scripted scenes that, while feeling impactful at times, do take you out of the game more often than not. It's also very short even by FPS campaigns. 4 to 5 hours should do the trick to finish it off. That being said, I think that BF3's campaign had so many memorable moments in, and definitely way more than what BF4 had. For the most part, BF4's campaign tries to give you the sandbox experience from multiplayer, with you being able to move through some of the levels with a bit more freedom than before. It's set in 2020, 6 years after the events of New York, and you play as a character called Wrecker. And let me tell you, get used to hearing that name a lot. Wrecker this, Wrecker that, Wrecker grab that thing, Wrecker do this, Wrecker come over here, Wrecker, Wreck-It Ralph. Now there are two main parts of the BF4 campaign that I instantly remember. One of those is the prologue and the initial car chase scene, which is epic, culminating in you being underwater, having to shoot the windscreen to save yourself and your squad. Visually, this looks damn impressive. I remember seeing the trailer for the first time with this gameplay, fishing in Baku with the Bonnie Tyler in the background, and hopefully I was thinking, well, maybe they've nailed it this time with the campaign. And that level was split into two parts. The first part is basically the end of the car chase, but you get to see that first under the water, and then it goes back in time to explain how you got there. On the way to being underwater, you fight your way through tons of enemies, end up on top of a construction site that collapses. You also had to cut off Staff Sergeant Dunn's leg and lean out of a car window during a chase to take out a helicopter with a grenade launcher. Pretty standard stuff then. It was a great intro to the game. Unfortunately, that pace didn't continue. Now the second mission that really sticks in my mind from this campaign is called South China Sea, and it's when you're aboard an aircraft carrier and it breaks in half. Visually and technically, this is so cool. When the entire ship is just breaking in half right in front of you, your squad on one side, bad guys on the other, and then you end up on top of it and fighter jets are sliding around you everywhere as you're struggling to escape. It was very fun. I have to say though, overall there were a lot less of those epic memorable moments that I think we got in the BF3 campaign. Oh, and if I have to hear the name Wreck-It anymore, I think I'll go crazy. The campaign of BF4 just wasn't that great. Short one-liners and characters that honestly you didn't really connect with. If anything, they annoyed you and you questioned their stupid decisions. In fact, I'm not sure I could really tell you the names of most of the characters that you run into. I just didn't feel invested in it at all. When given the option at the end of who to save in a roundabout way, I'm not sure I wanted to save either. I just got the feeling that DICE worked on BF3's campaign longer than they did for BF4. BF3's campaign just felt like it had way more quality and polish and care to it. Before we get onto Battlefield Bad Company, because I know you're all itching to talk about that, let's just have a quick chat about Battlefield Hardline. I know that this is a touchy subject, but Visceral Games definitely tried to do something a bit different here. Did it work? Some loved it, some hated it. To be fair, the whole game was surrounded with negativity though, not just because of the single player campaign. But in that campaign you play as Nick Mendoza, a Cuban-American detective who'd just been transferred to the Miami Drug Squad. The game really changes up the Battlefield single player though, because it focuses on the idea that you're a cop, so you've got shootouts, but you also look for evidence and you can arrest suspects. It's a tale of drugs, money and betrayal, but sadly falls flat when it comes to an overall experience. I didn't mind the story, to be completely honest, but the gameplay was very bland, especially the stealth missions, and it didn't keep you coming back for more. The first mission has you taking down a small drug bust, and one of the perps, that's right, I said perps, runs and a car chase ensues. It's actually in this car chase that perhaps the quality isn't shown off to its full potential. The car you're chasing just floats around the road a bit with no sense of weight. It's actually quite off-putting. And the route is of course a set one, but I think more could have been done to at least make it look a little better than it ended up being. They tried an interesting TV show format with this too, some cool ideas in there, but the shootouts felt very whack-a-mole and the stealth sections were just way too easy and not engaging in the slightest. Okay, so now time for Bad Company, and more specifically Bad Company 2. I think Bad Company 1 definitely paved the way for Bad Company 2, but it's the sequel that most people remember very fondly. I suppose that we should briefly mention the first game though. You could arguably say that it was funnier than the second one in terms of outright humour, Haggard especially being the standout funny guy. The original Bad Company game was a console only game though, so the PC market didn't get their hands on it at all. When it comes to Bad Company 2, the story had you playing as Preston Marlowe, who was a member of Bad Company, and he's pitted with, well, a bunch of misfits to be honest, but that's part of the charm of the game. The truth is that the overall story is rather generic, and even the characters themselves fit into some serious stereotypes, yet we didn't seem to care all that much. The campaign had humour, and to be honest, that went a long way to making the game more interesting. The depth of each of these characters, or at least the humour and silliness, makes the campaign seem less boring than perhaps it would be without that. And I think you could argue that BF3 and 4 take themselves a bit too seriously, and because of that they suffer when it comes to having any sort of connection for the players with the characters. Some of the missions in Bad Company 2 aren't very exciting, and while some missions do have a more sandbox feel with minor destruction, it can still feel very linear at times. I think if it wasn't for the setting and the direction of the story, it perhaps wouldn't be remembered as fondly as it is. Although I did really enjoy going back to World War II at the start of the game. Before we get to BF5, there's of course one more game that we have to talk about, and that's BF1. BF1 did something a bit different than previous games. Instead of having a main story with one or two protagonists in it, it instead had multiple mini-stories called war stories. Each of these stories tried to tell a different tale from all over the world. After all, it was a world war, and these ranged from you playing as a chauffeur turned tank driver fighting in the Battle of Cambrai, or a Bedouin warrior called Zara working alongside Lawrence of Arabia as a bodyguard. Now, being set in World War I, it offered up certain opportunities for new stories that weren't the same ones that you might expect from a World War game. Visually, the stories were impressive, and there are some cool elements, but I think that most players really missed having a full-length story, because you don't really have time in each of these war stories to connect or get to know the characters. The best one of them, in my opinion, was the tank one. That was the longest, and you actually started to feel for the group inside that tank. The rest were very throwaway, and again they suffered from the pop-up pirate syndrome where the AI was just really dull and uninteresting. You also miss out on a lot of the set piece moments you get in BF3 and 4, and what made Bad Company 2's campaign so memorable, for example, is because you actually connected with the characters. I don't think you get a chance to do that really with these war stories because they just don't last long enough. Some of the writing I felt was quite awkward and unnatural too. And then that just leaves us with BF5. We only have a small amount of information on what to expect from BF5's single player. But what we do know for sure is that the BF5 single player will carry on with the war stories format from BF1. The tagline, if you like, for BF5 is to tell the untold stories of World War II. So expect to get different stories than you might think of World War II. Supposedly there are 4 war stories at launch: the prologue, Nordlys, Tyrolier and Under No Flag. Nordlys follows a young resistance fighter in the snow in 1943 Norway. Under No Flag is about a British criminal in North Africa, and supposedly one of the stories will feature a German soldier's perspective, something that BF1 avoided. And I don't think we've had any single player World War II campaigns or stories played from the perspective of a German, and that one is called The Last Tiger, so I imagine some kind of tank will feature prominently in that story. Could be very special, that one, if they pull it off. Of course, I am looking forward to playing through all of the single player that BF5 has to offer because I'm a Battlefield fan. I have to be honest though, I just don't think the war story system works very well. With World War II and World War I, DICE have a great platform to tell some really remarkable stories, but because the chapters are relatively small in length and separate, like I mentioned earlier, you never really get enough time to connect with the characters and care for them. I still think that they should go back to the BF3 Bad Company 2 style, where you've got a full single player campaign focusing around a group of people. That's just me though. I wonder if in future we'll still see Battlefield having a single player campaign though. Would you miss it if it was gone? Does it even make sense for DICE to create it anymore if that many people don't play it? In recent times we've seen Call of Duty ditching its single player campaign to focus elsewhere. In their case it was the Battle Royale mode and zombies, which it looks like has been a really good move, at least in the early stages. It's been received very well. So for Battlefield 6 or Bad Company 3 or whatever comes next, could Battlefield follow suit down that line? We already know that there's been a delay in the game's release to better polish it, but could the removal of single player in the future give them more time to focus on the multiplayer? Is that what players want or need? I'm not sure, but it wouldn't surprise me if we stopped seeing a single player campaign in the future. Battlefield has and always will be 99% focused on multiplayer. That's what it does best, and unless there's a big shake-up with how they're doing things, I don't see their campaigns ever being that popular again, although I would like to, because we know the Frostbite engine is very powerful. They could create something truly unique. And that's all for today guys. I hope you enjoyed this retrospective look at the Battlefield single player campaigns along the years. Let me know down below which your favourite was and maybe which one you didn't like the most, and should they continue making these in the future. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.